In this story by Ruskin Bond, the narrator tells us about the effect his pet chameleon has on other people. Read on to find out what happens with this unique pet.
This is the story of Henry, our pet chameleon. Henry's eyes were his most remarkable feature. They were not beautiful, but his left eye was quite independent of his right. He could move one eye without disturbing the other. Each eyeball, bulging out of his head, wobbled side to side, backward and forward. One day, grandfather was visiting a friend when he came upon a noisy scene at the garden gate. Men were shouting, hurling stones and brandishing sticks. The cause of the uproar was a chameleon that had been discovered sunning itself on a shrub. Grandfather was just in time to save the chameleon from certain death. He brought the little reptile home. That chameleon was Henry, and that was how he came to live with us. When I first visited Henry, he would treat me with great caution, sitting perfectly still on his perch with his back to me. For a long time, Henry trusted no one and responded to my friendliest gestures with grave suspicion. He would blow himself up to an enormous size as his lungs filled up with air, while his color changed from green to red. He would sit up on his hind legs, swaying from side to side, hoping to overawe me. Opening his mouth very wide, he would let out an angry hiss. Henry was a harmless fellow. If I put my finger in his mouth, even during his wildest moments, he would simply wait for me to take it out again. Henry was sometimes willing to take food from my hands. This he did very swiftly. His tongue performed like a boomerang and always came back to him with the food, usually an insect, attached to it. Although Henry didn't cause any trouble in our house, he did create somewhat of a riot in the nursery school down the road. It started out quite innocently. When the papayas in our orchard were ripe, grandmother sent a basketful to her friend Mrs. Ghosh, who was the principal of the nursery school. While the basket sat waiting, Henry went searching for beetles and slipped in among the papayas, unnoticed. The gardener dutifully carried the basket to the school and left it in Mrs. Ghosh's office. When Mrs. Ghosh returned after making her rounds, she began examining and admiring the papayas. And out popped Henry. Mrs. Ghosh screamed. Henry squinted up at her, both eyes revolving furiously. Mrs. Ghosh screamed again. Henry's color changed from green to yellow to red. His mouth opened as though he too would like to scream. An assistant teacher rushed in, took one look at the chameleon, and joined in the shrieking. Henry was terrified. He fled from the office, running down the corridor and into one of the classrooms. There he climbed up on a desk while children ran in all directions. Henry finally made his exit through a window and disappeared into the garden. Grandfather and I didn't think Henry would find his way back to us, because the school was 3 blocks away. But a few days later, I found him sunning himself on the garden wall. Although he looked none the worse for his adventure, he never went abroad again.